Welcome to SleepScape. If you enjoyed this, you can like the video and subscribe for more. If there's a story that you'd like for me to tell, feel free to leave a comment. It helps more than you know. Now, let's get into it. In 1994, a ranching family moved onto a remote 480-acre property in northeastern Utah, believing they had found their forever home. For privacy, they've always been referred to as the Gormans. The family seemed grounded, practical, and stable. The father was a hardened rancher and college-educated businessman. His wife was intelligent, professional, and organized. Their two teenage children were strong students with promising futures. On the day they moved in, the rancher's father was also there helping unload. The land itself looked ideal. It was wide, green, and well watered, with pastures, brush, trees, and a creek along one side. On the other side rose a jagged red sandstone ridge, watching over the property like a wall. It should have been the start of a new life. Instead, it became the beginning of a nightmare. While the family was unloading their belongings, they noticed an animal near the tree line. At first, they assumed it was a stray dog, but as it moved closer, they realized it was something much larger. It looked like a wolf. Not just any wolf, but an enormous one. The animal advanced slowly in a zigzag pattern, cautious but deliberate, moving closer and closer to the family. At first, they wondered whether it might be a domesticated wolf or some kind of exotic pet. It wasn't acting like a normal wild predator. It walked right toward them, closing the distance until it was only a few feet away. The air carried the wet, musky scent of a soaked dog. The creature was massive, estimated at close to 200 pounds, with a thick skull, powerful jaws, and a back that reached nearly to the rancher's chest. Then, without warning, it exploded into motion. The wolf lunged toward a nearby corral where Angus calves had been unloaded earlier. One calf had stuck its head through the bars, and the animal clamped down on its skull with terrifying force, dragging it out. The rancher rushed in and began kicking the beast as hard as he could in the ribs. It did nothing. His father struck it repeatedly with a baseball bat. Still nothing. No cry, no stumble, no sign of pain. The rancher then ordered his son to grab a .357 Magnum from the truck. He fired once. No reaction. He fired again. Still nothing. A third shot hit the animal in the side. There was no yelp, no visible wound, no blood, no panic. The thing simply kept pulling at the calf as if the bullets meant nothing. Now desperate, the rancher retrieved a .30-06 hunting rifle. He fired again, and this time the creature released the calf and sat back. Another shot followed, and a chunk of flesh flew off its body. The family could hear the rounds hitting flesh and bone, yet the animal behaved as though it felt almost nothing. Finally, it turned and walked away. Not ran, walked. The rancher and his son followed it into a muddy area near the creek, tracking its heavy prints through the brush. At one point, the paw prints sank deep into the mud, showing just how heavy the animal had been. Then, suddenly, the tracks stopped. No sign of a leap, no trail continuing forward. The prints simply ended, as if the animal had vanished into thin air. When they returned, the piece of flesh that had been shot from the creature smelled rotten, like meat left out in the sun for days. And that was only the first day. Later, when investigators showed the family images of different wolf species, they agreed that the closest match to what they had seen was something resembling a dire wolf. A dire wolf, an animal believed to have gone extinct thousands of years ago. As strange as that sounds, the wolf encounter was only the beginning. The property they had moved on to would later become infamous as Skinwalker Ranch. The ranch sat in Utah's Uintah Basin, a region long associated with bizarre reports, UFO sightings, strange lights, mutilated animals, massive creatures, disembodied voices, and stories passed through both local rumor and native tradition. The basin had a long reputation before the Gormans ever arrived. Residents, law enforcement officers, ranchers, and members of the Ute community had been describing unusual events there for decades. UFO sightings were common enough that many locals treated them as part of life. Cattle mutilations had been reported again and again. Some families spoke about things seen in the sky. Others talked about what moved across the land at night. There were warnings about skinwalkers, malevolent entities tied to cursed traditions, shape-shifting, and spiritual danger. Whether outsiders believed those stories or not, many native residents took them very seriously and avoided the area. The Gormans knew none of this when they bought the ranch. They did, however, notice some unsettling details. Heavy chains had been mounted near the doors, as if huge guard dogs had once been stationed there. Doors and cabinets inside the home were secured with bolts and locks. The former owners had even included a bizarre condition in the sale agreement: no digging on the property without prior approval. At the time, the family dismissed it as eccentric behavior from previous owners. Soon, that explanation stopped working. Objects began disappearing and reappearing in impossible places. A heavy post hole digger vanished from the yard and was later found in a high tree. Groceries brought home from town were unpacked, only to appear back inside their bags minutes later. A towel left beside the shower would turn up in the freezer. A hairbrush would vanish from the bathroom and later be found in the microwave. At first it was annoying, then it became terrifying. The family started hearing footsteps in the hallway at night, but when they checked, no one was there. They saw dark figures near windows and at the foot of the beds. They heard voices speaking in unknown languages, sometimes sounding as though they were hovering just above them. Lights also began appearing around the property. Some nights, the ranch would be flooded with intense illumination from above, as if a spotlight had been turned on from the sky. Other times, beams of light seemed to shoot upward from the ground itself. They heard mechanical noises beneath their feet, like machinery operating underground. And then there were the animals. The first wolf was not the last. Another oversized wolf-like creature approached Ellen Gorman at the gate, so tall its back nearly reached the roofline of her vehicle. At times, these wolves were seen alongside other bizarre canine creatures that didn't resemble anything known in the area. The family also reported strange birds, bright red, tropical-looking birds that did not belong in Utah and were never identified. Then came something even stranger. One afternoon, Tom and Ellen returned from town to find a violent commotion in the corral. Something large was attacking their horses. It looked roughly dog-like, but not entirely. It had the size and muscle of a powerful predator. short, heavy legs, and a long reddish tail like a fox. It clawed at the horses, injuring them badly. Tom ran toward it. The creature fled up a hill and then disappeared. Not into brush, not behind rocks. It simply vanished. By this point, the Gormans were also seeing aerial objects. Some looked like large, boxy vehicles, almost like an RV, except they rose into the air and drifted off. Others resembled discs. Others were triangular. Some projected beams of light across the property. Others appeared as glowing orbs in different colors: white, red, orange, and blue. The family believed these objects were not behaving like aircraft. They moved intelligently. Sometimes they seemed to react to people directly. Even stranger, several witnesses described intense emotional effects when these phenomena appeared. In some cases, people felt an unnatural wave of joy or euphoria. In others, they experienced overwhelming fear far beyond what the moment should have caused. One report described a blue orb hovering close enough for witnesses to see what looked like liquid boiling inside of it. The emotional effect, they said, was immediate and overwhelming, raw terror. The events escalated from unsettling to destructive. The family's pets began reacting to something unseen. Large farm dogs hid for days and refused to come out. Then 6 cats vanished all at once and were never found again. In one of the most disturbing incidents, Tom watched as a glowing blue orb toyed with 3 of his hunting dogs, drawing them toward the tree line. He later heard terrible screams. The next morning, all he found were 3 greasy, burned spots where the dogs seemed to have died or been destroyed. By then, the family was under severe stress. They were losing sleep. The children's grades were slipping. Their emotional state was deteriorating. And then, the cattle losses began. The Gormans were not hobby ranchers. They had invested heavily in expensive, selectively bred livestock. Losing even a few animals could be financially devastating. But they didn't lose just a few. They lost 14. Some of the cattle disappeared without explanation. In one case, tracks in the snow simply ended, with no sign of where the animal had gone. In another, a healthy cow seen moments earlier was found mutilated minutes later, with no blood on the ground and no sign of predators or intruders. One neighboring rancher reported a cow with broken legs that vanished, reappeared, and was later found with all 4 legs broken, as if it had been dropped from a height. Even the family's 4 prized bulls became part of the mystery. After joking that losing those bulls would financially ruin them, Tom and Ellen returned from town to find all 4 gone from the corral. Eventually, they discovered the bulls somehow packed tightly inside a locked metal trailer, crammed together and standing in a dazed trance. No one could explain how they got there. At this stage, Tom began to wonder whether the family was being targeted by some kind of secret military operation or psychological test. Out of options, he went to the press. That decision changed everything. News stories about the ranch eventually reached Robert Bigelow, the Las Vegas businessman who founded the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS. Bigelow bought the property. The family moved out, though Tom remained on the ranch as manager. NIDS then launched a scientific investigation, treating the ranch as a living laboratory. Researchers installed equipment, conducted surveys, interviewed witnesses, studied the land, examined the flora and fauna, and monitored the property with surveillance cameras. They also brought in specialists, law enforcement contacts, veterinarians, and field investigators. Their hope was simple: document the phenomena under controlled conditions. But what they found only deepened the mystery. During the NIDS years, investigators reported lights, UFO-like objects, magnetic anomalies, equipment malfunctions, strange odors, mutilated animals, and sightings of large humanoid or creature-like forms. One especially disturbing event happened in daylight. Tom and Ellen were tagging newborn calves in an open pasture. They moved only a short distance away. Moments later, the mother cow began acting wildly, and when they rushed back, a calf they had just tagged less than an hour earlier had been mutilated. A huge amount of tissue and organs were gone. There was almost no blood. Researchers later examined tissue samples and concluded that different cutting methods appeared to have been used. One broad and forceful, another sharp and precise. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no explanation. In another incident, investigators witnessed what appeared to be a glowing, tunnel-like opening in the night. One observer believed he saw something climbing out of it. Then a large, dark creature emerged, stood upright, and ran toward the hillside before disappearing. Was it an animal? A trick of the light? Something else? No one could say. And that became the central problem of Skinwalker Ranch. Again and again, terrifying things were seen, heard, or experienced. Again and again, hard evidence slipped away. The cameras failed or caught only distant lights. Tracks vanished. Bodies disappeared. Witnesses were credible, but the phenomenon refused to behave in a way that allowed clean scientific proof. Depending on who you ask, Skinwalker Ranch is a case about folklore, fear, UFOs, interdimensional theory, environmental anomalies, or human misinterpretation. But for the family who lived there, it was never an abstract debate. It was a place where objects moved on their own, where voices spoke from the darkness, where predators couldn't be killed, where cattle were mutilated in broad daylight, where glowing objects hovered over fields, and where reality itself seemed unstable. To skeptics, the ranch is a pile of stories with too little proof. To believers, it is one of the most concentrated paranormal hotspots in modern history. Either way, the legend of Skinwalker Ranch was not built from one strange night. It was built piece by piece through fear, through repetition, through witnesses who insisted they saw what they saw, and through a property that seemed to challenge every ordinary explanation placed on it. And for the Gorman family, it all began with a wolf that should not have existed.